Hello everyone and welcome back to another AFL Fantasy Fanatics head-to-head episode where we put two players up against one another to see who we're picking in our sides for 2025. This is episode 6 of the series. If you haven't checked out the previous 5 episodes, make sure that you do that. We've had some very, very good guests on all of the episodes as we always do. And jumping on is another very special guest to be chatting about a couple of cheaper midfielders in Ollie Hollands and James Peatling, where could be shaping a lot of people's structures in their midfield because these guys could be quite important for that, both in the 600k range. But jumping on with me, as I said, is a very special guest. You see him all over Twitter, putting out a lot of really good information and putting out a lot of good questions for the community to get involved in as well, jumping on a few podcasts as well, which is obviously very, very good. He's Vams, the fantasy nut. Vams, mate, how are you?
Good, mate. Good. Just obviously on the eve of the preseason games, can't wait to get stuck into it. So, yeah, obviously chatting about a couple of, as you mentioned, a couple of important guys with regards to structure. I think most people have room to fit in 1, 2, maybe 3 if you're including guys like Oliver in terms of that mid-pricer sort of price point in your midfield, and Hollands and Peatling are 2 of the more potentially popular options in that price bracket. So, yeah, let's compare them.
Yep, exactly right. Let's get stuck into it. So the two players here, obviously Ollie Hollands priced at 640k, 6.8% ownership at the moment. So a few people there, but still fairly unique there, and average to 62.4 from his 22 games. But obviously he's very relevant because of a potential role change that we're going to be chatting about. And then James Peatling, who made the move over from GWS to the Crows, 634k, so 6k cheaper than Ollie Hollands, average of 61.8 from his 17 games, which again included some impacted games there as well. He's currently owned by 20.5% of the competition, so a bit more popular there. I'll be taking James Peatling, Vans will be taking Ollie Hollands, and as always, we start with our guest, and we will be starting with Ollie Hollands. So Vans, mate, please tell me and the listeners why we should be starting with Ollie Hollands in our classic side for 2025.
All right, well, why don't I start with the bull case first? And I think it's fair to say it centres around this role change that you alluded to. He's moved from a wing to this halfback role. We've got confirmation this preseason that that's where he's been training all preseason. That's where they intend to play him this season. And we've got a bit of a clue as to how he might go in that role, because there was a sample size of 4 or 5 games late last year where he did move to that role, and he actually scored quite well in that role. So if you look at his scores from basically around 20 through to the end of the home and away season, I think he moved back to that halfback role in the latter part of that Port Adelaide game. So if you include that game, his average in that role was 86. If you don't include that game, and admittedly he scored poorly in that game, but if you only include the games where he played full-time in the halfback role, only a 4-game sample size, which included a couple of nice matchups, it needs to be said. But over those 4 games, he averaged 94. So that's what we know he can do and what he has done in that role. Whether he does that over the course of half a season, that's up for debate. But again, we've seen what he can score in that role. And I think in the past couple of seasons, it really does seem to be that this halfback role seems to be the juicy role for potential breakout guys. It was always, in years gone by, who's getting more midfield time, who's getting more CBAs, whereas now a lot of that bulk scoring does tend to occur off halfback. And just last year, we saw a whole plethora of guys that had a huge bump in their scoring by moving to halfback. We obviously saw Nick Martin, Dane Zorko, Max Holmes, Matty Roberts, Flanders, Jordan Clark, Zach Fisher, even Sexton for a few games when he was back there. Had a couple of rookies like Colby McKercher, Sheasel the previous year, obviously, and obviously Riley Bonner as well. Huge jump in scoring. All of those guys essentially moved to a halfback role, and as I said, had a huge bump in their scoring. So he's moving to this role. So he's got that potential to also have a big bump in his scoring. The big other one is obviously the recent unfortunate news with regards to Nick Newman's injury. So Nick Newman, he got a lot of ball back there, and I'm not saying we should expect Ollie Hollands to replace what Nick Newman could do or did, but that's a lot of both transition points lost for Carlton and also kick-ins. Newman averaged 85 transition points per game last year, which was 5th amongst all defenders in the AFL. And he got 19 points per game just from kick-ins and transition points from kick-ins alone. So, again, a lot of points potentially up for grabs there. He won't get all of those. So just to be clear, this is not a situation where this player's out now, let's put another player in and they're going to perform exactly the same. That's not how it works. But some of that ball will go elsewhere. Now, how much of that, again, goes to Ollie Hollands remains to be seen and certainly up for debate. Those kick-ins, and as I'll get to in a moment, that's probably a key one as well. Will he get some of those kick-in points? And I guess the final thing is, in terms of that bull case, is he's going to get DPP almost certainly, unless again they change things up and move move him back to a wing or something like that. He's likely to get DPP with that first round of changes. So even if he doesn't pop and go 90 plus or anything like that, you've got that opportunity relatively early on to swing him into your defense, and he could stay there a little bit longer rather than taking up a midfield spot that could be taken up by other guys with either more cash gen opportunity or more scoring breakout potential, etc. So you've got that DPP flexibility there. So I would say that's probably the crux of the bull case for Ollie Hollands. In terms of the bear case, or why he might not end up being a good pick, the reality is he's an okay player, but I don't think he's in the realm of some of those players that I mentioned previously, like a Nick Martin or a Max Holmes, etc. Even if I'm not saying he's necessarily Riley Bonner, but if you look at what Riley Bonner did last year as a comparison, Riley Bonner was priced at 50. Ollie is currently priced at 62, so he is more expensive, so not quite the same amount of value. The other thing as well with Riley Bonner was St Kilda was ranked number 1 in the AFL for transition points, and last year in particular, per Jaiden Popowski, their transition points were the highest of any team in the AFL since 2017. So it was a very, very high year for at least St Kilda, and historically with regards to transition points. So expecting sort of a Riley Bonner type first 5-6 games or average might be a little bit unrealistic. I mean, he was going at, I think it was about 95 through the first 5 to 10 games or something. It was outrageous. I don't think we can necessarily expect that to repeat. Carlton, however, were ranked 9th with regards to transition points. So again, just not quite that same amount of points back there. I guess the other big one is, will Ollie Hollands get kick-ins? I think this is a big one. I put out a tweet a couple of days ago with regards to how big a factor is kick-in points for fantasy defenders. And the stat I came up with was that of the top 15 AFL fantasy defenders in terms of averages, all but 2 of them were either number 1 or number 2 for team kick-ins. The only 2 that weren't were Max Holmes and Nick Martin, and Martin actually was relatively high with the kick-ins early in the season when his scoring was actually at its best. So to really push that sort of scoring to 90 plus, you do really need to be high up there with regards to kick-ins. Last year, most of the kick-ins were taken up by McGovern, Nick Newman, and Sard. So obviously Newman's not there this year, so where those kick-ins go, I guess remains to be seen. I am not sure. I probably wouldn't put Ollie Hollands in that elite kick type category. So, do they want him taking kick-ins? Again, let's see what happens in some of these practice games or the preseason game to maybe give us a clue. But it may just be that he gets a few more here and there, but maybe the rest just go back to McGovern and Sard. But like history shows, without those kick-ins, it's probably going to be very hard to go 85 plus, which in my opinion is probably roughly what he needs to be end up being a very good pick. And look, if he goes 85, he's going to make you about 140K. I'm going by the slider team picker tool to make that projection. If he only goes at about 80, again, it doesn't mean it's a horrible pick. It's still nearly 20 points of upside there, but he'll probably only make you about 100K. So look, it's not a bad pick, but could you then in the midfield potentially go an extra rookie? If you pick the right rookie, that might go 65-ish, let's just say. they're going to make you a lot more cash, and you can use that spare money that you've saved going for a rookie to use elsewhere on your team. So I guess he's in that very awkward price with regards to not very, very cheap like a Bonner was last year. And he's unlikely, I'm not going to say it's impossible, but he's unlikely to score well enough such that you're probably going to just leave him in your team, to the mid-season bye, let's just say, right? I mean, you potentially, if he's going 85, maybe you could put him into your D5, D6 spot, again, with that DPP flexibility. But again, just that awkward price as to you ask yourself, what do I want him to score? And then, as I said, without kick-ins, is it realistic for him to score those points? I guess the other thing as well, I'm probably more inclined to be bullish Ollie Hollands if Sam Doherty's not in defence. I think if Sam Doherty's back in defence, I think a lot of the ball will go through him. And I think that puts a little bit more of a cap on what Hollands could do. Having said that, from all reports, it seems as if Doc is going to be playing up the ground. Again, we'll wait and see what the preseason game shows. But if that turns out to be the case and Doc is up the ground, wing, a little bit of half forward, maybe a little bit of midfield as well, then I think there is a path for Hollands to potentially go into that mid, maybe if we're lucky, high 80s. But yeah, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so with Doherty, obviously heard him on the Summer Sessions podcast that Carlton hosts, and he said that he'll be playing his two positions mainly this year will be wing and inside mid. And he said that, and his words were, if he's in defence, something would have had to have gone wrong. So for me, that's sounding like he's not going anywhere near defence, which I guess would be the tick in Ollie Hollands' case. And then when you were talking about, obviously, his average in the small sample size at the end of last year, obviously, that's sort of a little good indicator. And obviously, Peatling, who we'll chat about in a sec, that's we got a small sample size of him as well with his CBAs. But with that small sample sizes, it's, I guess, showing the pathway as to where he could potentially go to. So if he was to go anywhere from 85 to 95, like he did in that 4-game stretch, I think that'd be really good for as a starting pick. I think the thing that goes along with that, I don't expect him to get a lot of kick-ins. I think that'll be going to Sard, McGovern. You might even see like a Wiedering get a little bit of a bump. Jordan Boyd might take 1 or 2. I could see Hollands taking 1 or 2, but I think, as you mentioned, with his kick, that's been the one knock on him, I think, so far, that I don't know if he's going to get many kick-ins. I think I heard on the +6 pod that when Pete was saying when he went to the Carlton training, when they did match sim, when they were specifically looking at defensive sort of kick-ins and everything like that, it was pretty much Sard and McGovern taking all of them, and I think Hollands might have taken 1 or 2. So if that's the case and we get maybe 1 or 2 a game or whatever, then that's great. It's an extra 3 to 6 points we'll get because we assume that he'll play on in those kick-ins. The thing I do like with Ollie Hollands, though, is even if he doesn't average 85, 90 for the season, we just need an average 85 plus for the first 7, 8 games. And the reason I think you can do that, even if it's not looking as good as like a Bonner, his early run is very, very good. So he's got Richmond, Hawthorn, it's a bit tough, Bulldogs, Collingwood, West Coast, North Melbourne, and Geelong in the first 7 weeks. And then he's got the Crows and then St Kilda after the Crows. So Crows obviously a bit trickier for defenders, but St Kilda obviously very good. So that opening run, there's not really any other teams he's not playing that you could put in that and say that makes it even better. It's probably as good a run over the first 8, 9 games you can really get, bar Hawthorn. So I think that opens up the possibility for that 90-plus average to potentially be there if he can do what he did last year in that 4-game stretch. Even if it's a bit less, I think the 80, at least 80-plus and 85-plus is definitely there with that early run. So what were your thoughts with that early run before we move over to Peatling?
No, I agree with you. Again, without kick-ins, I start to get nervous. I just think it's very, very hard. But as you just mentioned, if you've got the schedule in your favor, all it takes is one out-of-the-box outlier ceiling scores, and that covers a lot. I mean, we saw that last year, even with Bonner. I think he had that very, very large 120, 130 game last year. And that means if you get a 60 the next game, that's fine. Your overall average is still going to be fine. So I think you make a very important point, which is we don't need him to average 85, 90 for the season. Can he do it for 7 or 8 rounds? And yeah, look, it's absolutely possible. It's a tough call, to be honest.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's he's very, very interesting. That's for sure. And I just think that early run is something that's definitely giving a tick in his favour. James Peatling though is very similar, obviously in price and also early run as well is another thing in Peatling's cat. So before I even chat about CBAs, Peatling's got a very good early run as well for midfield. So he's got St Kilda, Essendon, North Melbourne, Gold Coast, Geelong. That's his first 5. So no real hard matchups in there. Obviously, some really good matchups there as well. Does go into a bit of a tougher month after that, but as long as he can get off to a good start, that's what we're after. Last year, obviously, at the Giants, there was a few injury-affected games. So just in total, he had 7 green vests last year. So that included rounds 2, 4, 5, 6, rounds 15, 17, and 18. So last year, if you remove those games and you only include games where he had at least 50% CBAs, which is what I think he'll get at the Crows this year. That's an 8-game sample size of a 90.9 average from 77% time on ground. That's also including a 33 against Essendon as well. Against Fremantle as well. Don't quite know what happened with that game. Obviously, we can't really disclude that because he did play a full game. But if you wanted to, it's a 9 average. But we'll keep it in there. If we want to include the one game where he had 42% CBAs against Geelong, where he scored a 57, still an 87.1 average. So that's still 25 points of upside, even with those 2 really, really poor scores in there. There's some big scores in there as well. There's a 115 against Sydney. That was obviously one of his first full games in the midfield there. Actually, had another 42% CBA game there as well, where he scored an 81. I think I might have actually included a separate score with that. But anyway, he gets it done. As I said, the 115 there, the 133 scored against Melbourne as well. That's the game I think a lot of us remember at the MCG on that Saturday night when he had the 28 disposals, 5 marks, 11 tackles, which was the big thing. The tackles was key. So he is a tackler. That's one thing that we have noticed in his games. And I think with the Crows as well, I think it was different at the Giants. I think at the Giants, there was a few guys ahead of him in the pecking order. So his market share was never really going to be high up at the Giants. I think coming to the Crows, I think he'll be one of the top 3 mids in the Crows team. I think his market share in that case will take a bit of an increase as well. I don't expect him to pass like a Jordan Dawson or a Matt Crouch or something like that in the midfield, but I think he'll be a top 3 in the midfield for market share at the Crows, which means I think that he can replicate at least that 90+ average, and I feel like he's got the ability to go 95. Whether he can get 3 triple figures, I don't know. Don't think so. Not with your Dawson, Crouch, Sligo, Rankin, guys like that in there that will still get their piece of the pie. And if we're rejecting like a Dawson to go 110 again, and if Rankin's going to improve to like a 90 and Saligo's going to take another step, and then you've got some other guys I didn't mention there that might sort of get some CBAs like a Sid Draper, Dan Curtin, just Josh Rochelle jump in there for some CBAs. So I don't know if he's got the ability to go that 100+, but I feel like a 90+ average is definitely on the cards, especially when you take in that sample size from last year. Moving over the Crows, I think he'll have more responsibility, more of a market share. I feel like he can get off to a good start, and particularly with those early 5 games as well. I think that we talked about with Ollie Hollands, that early schedule, if they can just pop one big score of like a 110, 115+, that you're sorted for cash gen, as long as they don't go like 20s and 30s. Because we know in fantasy, that big score will stay in their price still for 5 weeks. So if they were to get it in like round 1 or 2, their cash gen is going up until like round 5, 6, 7, which is exactly what we want. So I feel like with the early fixtures for both, and particularly as well with Peatling as well, I feel like that could well and truly happen. So what were your thoughts, Vams, on James Peatling and what he can do at the Crows?
Yeah, I think that's a very good summary, and I'm bullish as well. I think we've seen, as you mentioned, we've seen at the Giants that in that role, he can score. So this is not a situation where we're wondering if he's got the scoring capacity. He does. It just comes down to whether he's going to get the role. And I think so much of it is really going to be about what that Crows midfield mix is going to be like. Is he going to be this? I mean, Dawson's going to be number one. I don't think anyone's going to dispute that. Or let's just say Dawson or Crouch. So whether he's like number 3, whether he's number 4, that's when you start to sort of wonder what his upside is. I put out a tweet a couple of days ago with regards to, where someone sits in the CBA pecking order and what their ceiling might be. And I mentioned that no third midfielder, inverted commas, as defined by the third most CBAs for an inside mid, no third midfielder averaged more than 100. We don't need him to do that. Like if he goes 95, beautiful. That's still a great pick. The issue is that no fourth midfielder went above 90. So that's where you start to sort of wonder whether he can be a good pick if he is indeed the fourth CBA mid. I think most likely you're correct. I think he's going to be, second, third, somewhere in that range. And the good thing is even if you are the third mid, the Crows is the one team that you still have a very high, very good potential to score well. Last year, they were number 3 in the AFL with regards to stoppage numbers. The year prior, they were number 1. So there is still a very, pending any potential game style changes, which could happen. But at this stage, the evidence shows that the Crows are a high stoppage team. And guess what? Peatling's a great tackler. So that should bode well for his scoring. It's just, can he be that third mid? And I think, someone like him, he was chased around the AFL. So, it stands to reason he's going to go to the team that gives him the best opportunity for the position he wants to play, which I suspect is midfield. And I doubt he came to the Crows to be the 4th or 5th mid. So, look, I'm bullish.
Yeah. I can't see a world where he's not in the top 3 CBA getters. Like he would have gone the Crows and they would have said, you're going to be one of our main mids. They've talked up how good his midfield craft is. Yes, I know you can spend a stint or 2 forward, but we were talking even off camera. Like we were just chatting about Dawson as well. And the Crows have got a lot of forwards there. And then you add a Neil Bullen into the mix. Dan Curtin's going to play in the midfield. In the forward line. Sid Draper will play forward as well. He'll mix probably between midfield and forward. When you add those guys in there, there's no need for even like your Peatlings and your Dawson and the guys like that to be resting forward as much. So I don't see him playing anywhere else other than midfield. And I've even just quickly, while we've just been chatting there, about even lifting up his stats from last year as a sample size to what he gets when he has 60% CBs, because I think there's definitely a world where you get 60% or more, because I think he'll be in the top 3. He had 5 games last year where he played over 60%, round 8 and then 19, 20, 21, 22. Average 102.8 in those games there. 115, 86, 133, 97 and 83. So really good scores there. I could definitely see that happening there. If you wanted to even remove that outlier game, that 133, it's still a 95 average from the other 4 games. So even he's shown the ability that he's got that ceiling. So I think you can still include that. So there is a world where he could average high 90s, low 100 if he is that number 1 or 2 midfielder, which I think he will be. But it'll just be interesting to see, I guess, what role he plays and sort of how that Crows mix works out. I don't think the Crows will change their game style a great deal. I just think a lot of injuries impacted the Crows last year. There was a lot of inaccurate kicking, which has been the story of the Crows from as long as I can remember as a Crows sport. We've never been able to kick straight at goal. And you sort of, Nix has been that guy that we've come in. That's been the game style. It's been contested footy. I see that being staying there. They've got the players, I think, that still suit that style. But they've also added a little bit of outside run with a Peatling that can do both. Neil Bullen, even coming on the outside as well. Miller are back. So I think that the Crows will be able to stay to that game style. And he may be able to get some transitional points as well, Peatling. So I think that he is in for a good year, and we'll just be interested to see how much he can add on his average. But the time has come, though, to pick who we'd be picking between the 2. So, Vams, if you had to pick one, who'd you picking out of Ollie Hollands and James Peatling?
If you forced me to pick one, I'd probably lean towards Peatling. I think I agree with your numbers. GWS also, they're also a very high stoppage team. They're very close to the Crows in terms of stoppage numbers as well. So I think it's fair to sort of translate that across. And, I think an average of 90 to 95 is absolutely achievable. Whereas I do have a little bit more with question marks with regards to Hollands. Again, those kick-in numbers, some of those nice scores that he had off for halfback last year were against a favourable oppositional favourable matchup. So whether that's realistic to sort of extrapolate through to a half a season, I'm not sure. I think the question for me is, as I said, I'd pick Peatling over Hollands. It's just a matter of whether can we pick both of them? And I think that's the interesting thing this year with regards to particularly the midfield structure is we've got what seems to be a good crop of rookies. We'll wait and see how many turn out to be fantasy viable from round one, but it seems like we'll have a fair selection to potentially choose from. We've got a bunch of underpriced premiums. We've got a bunch of very nice top end premiums that could go a step higher. We've got a bunch of sort of previously injured guys that are underpriced as well. How do you fit all these guys in? Plus a Peatling, plus a Holland. So I think coming up with that right structure or that right combination, that's probably the tricky part this year.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'd be going Peatling as well between the two. But I actually, as you said, I've currently got both in my current team. I think both offer value. The rookies is going to be what I think dictates probably the decision. If I'm seeing a lot of these rookies looking good in the preseason, then I might sort of cull one of them. And it probably would be Hollands just. But then again, I might even cull one of the other midfielders, maybe one of the top price ones, and maybe use that money elsewhere, depending on how I look. And Hollands and Peatling will both be good watches. I think both teams will line up in their practice games like they will in the real season. They both don't play opening round. But like Carlton obviously finished poorly, obviously, in terms of the last couple of games in the final, and Crows obviously had a poor year. I think that they're going to be trying to get their structures right in the preseason games, at least in their final practice preseason games. So big watches in the practice games, which are good for us. Start tomorrow, obviously, when this video goes out. So obviously this is on the Friday. Obviously tomorrow we get our first couple of games, obviously the Bulldogs and Essendon game, and then obviously the Indigenous All-Star game, which we are very, very excited about. Just before we finish up, Vams, have you got both in your current setup, or have you just got the one?
Oh, look, at the moment, I'm just experimenting with different sort of combinations of players, just seeing what structures I feel most comfortable with. I can tell you I've had teams where I've had neither of them, and I've also had teams where I've had one and teams where I've had both. So I'm not just trying to sit on the fence. It's still a bit of a watch and wait, but I certainly like both options at this stage. Just see, as I said, how many can we start and go from there. Still a few weeks to worry about that, though.
Yeah, exactly right. No, looking very much forward to it. But that'll do us for episode 6 of the head-to-head series. Let us know in the comments below who you guys will be picking out of the two. Would you be picking both? Would you pick neither? Would you pick one of them? Let us know in the comments. If you've got any other questions, put them in the comments as well below, and I'll get to them. All of them. I respond to every comment on here as well. So put them in there and you will get a response. If you'd also like another question answered, head over to Ask Me on Q, spelled QU.com/AFL Fantasy Fanatics. You want to send your whole team through as the season approaches us, then feel free to do that. You can send your screenshots through, get a personalized audio response. So make sure you guys check that out if you would like to do so. Vams, mate, thank you very much for jumping on with me. Where can the people find you across the socials? And also, what can people be expecting from you for the rest of pre-season into the season proper?
Yeah, g'day, mate. So I think just find me on Twitter at Fantasy Nut. You'll just see me sort of spit out some thoughts there. Otherwise, looking forward to getting stuck into it. Sorry, that's my son in the background.
No, it's all good, mate. He's been good for the episode, so that's good. But you can find me at BAILSDT across the socials. You can find us at AFL Fantasy Fans on Twitter as well. The next 3 episodes will be next week. Obviously, haven't locked those in just yet, but we're recording them over the weekend. So you guys will have another combo and another special guest on Monday. So stay tuned for that. And obviously Sunday will be live on YouTube at 8 p.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Time, and then 5 p.m. Perth time, reviewing a couple of these pre-season games we've already seen, and then also having Fry jump on with us to chat some rookies to who you should be putting on your watch lists ahead of the practice games there. So really looking forward to chatting to Fry about some of those rookies. But thanks, everyone. And we'll catch you guys on Sunday and then Monday for the next head-to-head. Enjoy the practice games. Enjoy footy being back. And we'll chat to you guys soon. I'm out. And we're out. See ya.